The transmission crackled with static, then a synthesized voice cut through the silence. "Apologies, humans. A regrettable incident occurred. A juvenile of your species wandered into a restricted harvesting zone. The matter has been dealt with." Greg Jones sat on the porch of his secluded cabin, overlooking a tranquil forest of towering redwoods. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of pine and damp earth. A half-finished carving of a soaring eagle lay in his calloused hands, the wood smooth and warm beneath his fingertips. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, painting shifting patterns on the worn wooden planks of the porch. It was a scene of hard-won peace, a fragile sanctuary he'd carved out for himself after a lifetime of war. The prioritized transmission shattered the illusion. It overrode the ambient forest sounds funneled through the cabin's antiquated comm system, a system he usually kept muted. Its interruption spoke volumes. Greg frowned, his weathered face etched with suspicion. "Clarified, dealt with," he growled, his voice raspy from years of disuse. The automated voice responded, its tone devoid of emotion. "Subject was processed as per harvesting protocols. Compensation will be offered." The words hung in the air, cold and clinical. Processed. Harvesting. The implications were sickening. Across the globe, news broadcasts erupted with the Arcturian communication. Static images displayed the emotionless alien text alongside translations. Each news anchor's face a mask of barely suppressed fury. The phrase "restricted harvesting zone" was repeated, a chilling euphemism that sparked immediate global outrage. Juxtaposed with the alien pronouncements were images of happy human children. Laughing faces smeared with ice cream, kids building sandcastles on sun-drenched beaches, a young girl chasing butterflies in a field of wildflowers. These were the faces of innocence, now contrasted with sterile diagrams depicting industrial processing plants, gears grinding, and abstract schematics hinting at the fate of the child. A wave of nausea washed over Greg. He saw Maya's face, her pigtails bouncing as she chased a ball, before the harvester came. His grip tightened on the wooden carving. Splinters bit into his skin, but he didn't notice. A memory surfaced unbidden, a burning orphanage, the screams of children trapped within, his futile attempts to break through the flames. The mission had been compromised. They all died. He crushed the eagle in his fist, the wood snapping with a sharp crack. He rose, his movements stiff but purposeful. He accessed a secure channel, his fingers flying across the archaic keyboard. A face flickered onto the screen. Sarah, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. A former military contact, a friend. "Greg," she acknowledged, her voice tight. "I saw the Arcturian message. Don't even think about it. Command is already drafting a compensation package." Compensation. Greg spat, the word infused with contempt. "They murdered a child, Sarah. There's no amount of money that can fix that." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, Greg, but we have to be rational. The Arcturians are a major trading partner. War is not an option." "It is now," Greg stated, his voice flat and unwavering. "The restricted harvesting zone is in disputed territory near the Gliesa system," Sarah said, her professional mask firmly in place. "Heavily defended by Arcturian warships. You're talking about suicide." "Then we'll make sure they die with us," Greg replied, his eyes burning with a cold, implacable fire. "That child deserves justice. Humanity deserves justice." He severed the connection, the screen going dark. He took a deep breath and activated the global communications array. His face, grim and resolute, appeared on every screen on Earth. "They took one of ours," he said, his voice carrying across the planet. "They offered us money for her life. We refused." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We warned them, we're coming." The message resonated across Earth like a thunderclap. Military enlistment centers were flooded with volunteers. Factories roared back to life, churning out weapons and ships. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of human technology. The Arcturians had made a grave mistake. They had awakened a sleeping giant. The Arcturian ambassador on Earth, a spindly creature with iridescent skin, made a desperate plea for de-escalation. His words were met with silence, then drowned out by the rising tide of human fury. Near the Gliese system, the Arcturians mobilized their defense fleet. They were confident in their superior technology, their advanced weaponry, their vast resources. They underestimated the one thing they could not quantify: the unwavering tenacity of a species fueled by grief and a thirst for revenge. They underestimated humanity. Across the galaxy, the dormant factories of Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt groaned back to life, their robotic arms swinging into motion once more. Molten metal flowed like rivers of fire, forging the hulls of warships and the barrels of railguns. News feeds showed lines of volunteers signing up for military service, their faces a mixture of unshakable focus and righteous fury. The air crackled with the energy of a species preparing for war. Miles away, in his secluded cabin nestled deep within the Redwood National Park, Greg Jones stood before a holographic display that overlaid the serene forest scene. Tactical maps of the Gliese system shimmered amongst the ancient trees. Schematics of cloaked vessels danced with the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. He ran a calloused hand through his graying hair, his eyes scanning the projections with a practiced intensity. A flicker of memory, a dusty street, the acrid smell of burning plastic, the high-pitched screams of children threatened to overwhelm him. He slammed the memory shut, forcing himself to focus on the present. He wouldn't fail again. Not this time. Then, with a precision that belied their relatively small numbers, humanity struck. Cloaked vessels, shimmering like mirages, slipped past the outer defenses of the Gliese system. Imp bursts crippled Arcturian drones, leaving them drifting helplessly in the void. Human fighters, nimble and aggressive, swarmed the larger Arcturian cruisers, targeting their power cores with pinpoint accuracy. On a sprawling research station orbiting Gliese 581G, Thea, an Arcturian engineer with iridescent blue skin, watched the battle simulations unfold on a massive screen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her bioluminescent markings pulsed erratically. The sleek, elegant designs of her people's warships were being systematically dismantled by the seemingly crude, yet brutally effective, human tactics. Driven by a growing unease, Thea initiated a clandestine inquiry into the harvesting incident. Her fingers danced across the console, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. She navigated through layers of restricted data, her anxiety mounting with each passing moment. Then she found it. Inconsistencies in the harvester's maintenance logged, subtle anomalies in the calibration of the energy dampeners, unexplained fluctuations in the harvesting beam. These weren't accidental malfunctions, they were deliberate modifications. Father. The memory surfaced unbidden. Thea, a young initiate listening to her father, a high-ranking Arcturian official, lament the increasing pressure to meet resource quotas. The Council demands more, Thea. More energy, more minerals, more. Everything. We must find ways to be more efficient, even if it means taking risks. The risks, Thea realized with a sickening lurch, were being borne by others. The logs painted a clear picture: systemic negligence in harvester maintenance, all to maximize resource output and appease the insatiable demands of the Arcturian Council. Back on Earth, Arcturian High Command stared in disbelief as their defense grid crumbled. Their initial assessment of humanity's capabilities, a minor, localized threat, had been catastrophically wrong. Thea delved deeper, uncovering encrypted communications indicating that the Arcturian government was actively suppressing information about the malfunctioning harvester, diverting blame and minimizing the incident. Greg, reviewing battle reports from the Gliese breakthrough, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. The initial victory was undeniable, but the long-term sustainability of the assault remained a question mark. "We hit them hard," he muttered to Sarah, his AI companion. "But for how long?" Knowing she was walking a razor's edge, Thea reached out to a sympathetic alien species, the ZZ-Glorg, a silicon-based lifeform known for their neutrality and their mastery of encryption technology. Using a secure channel, she arranged for them to relay a heavily encrypted message to the human fleet, bypassing Orcsian surveillance. Her fingers flying across the console, Thea compiled her findings: the harvester logs, the encrypted communications, the evidence of systemic negligence, and encoded them into a compressed data packet. She knew that if this message was intercepted, her life would be forfeit. But it was too late. Orcsian intelligence, alerted to the unauthorized data transfers, had already pinpointed her location. Security forces wherein osing in. Thea's message reached Greg. Sarah, after hours of intensive analysis, confirmed its authenticity. "The encryption is ZZ-Glorg grade, sir," she reported. "The data is compelling. It appears the harvester malfunction was not accidental." Greg stared out at the holographic forest, his mind racing. This wasn't a simple act of revenge anymore. This was something far more complex, something that could reshape the entire galactic landscape. Knowing her time was running out, Thea prepared to abandon her research station. She gathered her personal belongings, purged her data logs, and activated the emergency escape pod. The klaxons blared, the red lights flashed, but she pressed on, driven by a desperate need to expose the truth. Then, as the Orcsian security forces breached the outer perimeter, Thea sent one final, desperate message to Greg, a heavily compressed burst transmission. "Trust no one. They are listening," before the line went dead. Thea was calibrating a quantum entanglement array when the alarms blared. Red light pulsed through the research station, bathing the pristine white corridors in a bloody glow. Before she could react, the door to her lab bucked inward, splintering into shards of plasteel. Orcsian security forces, clad in black exosuits, swarmed the room, their energy rifles humming with lethal intent. She scrambled back, knocking over a console, sparks flying as its delicate circuits overloaded. Resistance was futile. Within seconds, she was pinned to the floor, her wrists locked in energy cuffs. The Orcsians moved with practiced efficiency, seizing her data logs and disabling the station's communication array. Greg's fingers tightened around the worn leather of his command chair as a garbled message flashed across his screen. "Compromised. Thea. Data." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a static-filled void. His gut clenched. Thea. Captured. He immediately activated the internal comms. "Security, isolate Sarah Lewis. I want her in holding cell Delta 9 immediately." A murmur of confusion rippled through the command center, but no one questioned the order. Sarah was one of his most trusted analysts, a key member of the strategic planning team. But Greg couldn't afford to take any chances. Sarah's face contorted in disbelief as two security officers escorted her towards the holding cells. "Greg, what is the meaning of this? I demand an explanation." Her voice was sharp, permeated with indignation. "I received a truncated message from Thea before she was apprehended," Greg said, his voice flat, betraying no emotion. "I have to consider all possibilities." Sarah stopped in her tracks, her eyes flashing. "Are you accusing me of treason, after everything I've done for this operation?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'll submit to any form of lie detection you deem necessary. Neural scan, truth serum, whatever it takes. Because I am 100% loyal to humanity, Greg. Don't you forget that." Ignoring Sarah's protestations, Greg barked orders into his comm. "Engineering, initiate a full system diagnostic and security sweep of the command center. Prioritize communication channels and data storage. I want to know if we have a digital intrusion, and I want to know now." The atmosphere in the command center thickened, heavy with suspicion and paranoia. Technicians scrambled across the floor, their faces illuminated by the glow of their diagnostic tools. Meanwhile, on the Arcturian flagship Dominion, intelligence officers were poring over Thea's seized data. Holographic projections of human battle formations and resource allocation strategies shimmered in the dimly lit war room. This human, Jones, an Arcturian commander, rasped, his voice synthesized through a vocoder. He appears to be the primary strategist. Eliminate him and their offensive will crumble. Inside the Dominion's interrogation chamber, Thea was strapped to a cold metal table, her mind a battlefield. Arcturian interrogators probed her thoughts, seeking weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything that could give them an edge. They used sonic pulses to induce disorientation, psychological manipulation to erode her dedication. But Thea held firm, her mind a fortress against their intrusion. She refused to reveal any crucial strategic information, clinging to the knowledge that countless lives depended on her silence. Flashback. Thea sat cross-legged on the floor of an Arcturian monastery, her mind racing. The oath of the Silent Watch, the robed instructor intoned. I vow to protect the innocent, to defend the defenseless, to stand against the tide of darkness, even unto death. Thea repeated the words, her voice trembling with conviction. It was a promise she intended to keep. Back in the Human Command Center, a team of analysts had discovered a disturbing anomaly. Sir, we've detected a significant shift in Arcturian supply routes, Lieutenant Alvarez reported, his brow furrowed with concern. A major convoy has been rerouted to Sector Gamma 9, a heavily fortified region near the galactic rim. Greg studied the holographic projection of the convoy's trajectory, his eyes narrowed. That doesn't make sense. Gamma 9 is a dead end. It's strategically insignificant. Then it hit him. It's a feint. They're trying to draw us away from something. Thea focused. She could feel the interrogation devices probing deeper, but she knew the station like the back of her hand. She had helped design the system. Mustering all her mental strength, she overloaded the primary power regulator. A surge of energy coursed through the interrogation equipment, causing a temporary system failure. Alarms blared as the chamber plunged into darkness. It was a brief window of opportunity, but it was all she needed. Working quickly, she rerouted a low-frequency distress signal, injecting a coded message into the carrier wave. Hydra head. At the human code-breaking facility on Luna, a team of specialists worked feverishly to decipher the faint signal. We've got something, sir, a young analyst exclaimed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A low-frequency distress signal originating from the Arcturian research station where Thea was captured. It's heavily encrypted, but I think I've cracked the code. Moments later, the message flashed across the screen. Hydra head. Hydra head, Greg muttered, his mind racing. He accessed the secure database. Hydra head, Ganymede Research Facility. Critical research into advanced weaponry and defense systems. Admiral, Greg said, his voice grim, divert Strike Force Valkyrie to Ganymede immediately. I want them there within the hour. This is not a drill. He knew it was a gamble, pulling resources away from the planned offensive. But if the Arcturians managed to destroy the research facility on Ganymede, it could cripple humanity's war effort. As Strike Force Valkyrie raced towards Ganymede, Arcturian forces launched their attack. Waves of fighter drones swarmed the research facility, overwhelming the initial defenses. Explosions rocked the lunar surface, sending plumes of dust and debris into the vacuum. Casualties were heavy. Commander Reyes, leader of Valkyrie, surveyed the carnage with iron will. Deploy the experimental defense system, he ordered. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine. The new defense system, based on captured Arcturian technology, sprang to life. A shimmering energy field enveloped the research facility, deflecting incoming fire and vaporizing enemy drones. The Arcturian assault faltered, then stalled, but the research facility had sustained significant damage. Meanwhile, Thea navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the research station, using her intimate knowledge of the layout and security protocols to evade detection. She disabled surveillance cameras, bypassed laser grids, and slipped past patrolling security forces. Her escape was a desperate gamble, but she knew she had to get back to humanity to warn them of the Arcturians' true intentions. Back on Earth, Greg received a garbled message from Commander Reyes on Ganymede. Ganymede secure, but they knew exactly where to hit us. The message was cut short by static, leaving Greg with a chilling realization. The Arcturians had inside information, a deeper intelligence network than they had previously imagined, and a plan far more devastating than he could have anticipated. Thea coughed, the recycled air of the wrecked research station thick with the metallic tang of coolant and the acrid burn of electrical fires. Disguised in the stained and ill-fitting uniform of an Arcturian maintenance technician, she navigated the skeletal remains of what had once been a bustling hub of scientific inquiry. Twisted girders groaned under the strain of compromised structural integrity, and emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each echoing footstep. Discovery meant certain death, but the child deserved justice. She reached the designated access panel, its scorched surface a testament to the Arcturians' thoroughness. With trembling fingers, she manipulated the release, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled amongst fried circuitry, was the data chip. A surge of relief washed over her, quickly followed by a chilling wave of willpower. This tiny sliver of silicon held irrefutable proof. The harvester's malfunction had been deliberate, an act of calculated sabotage masked as an accident. Meanwhile, in a sterile conference room on Luna, Greg leaned forward, his gaze unwavering as he addressed Sarah. "Tell me again about your interactions with the Arcturians before the incident." His voice was low, a predator testing the strength of its prey. Specifically, any offers they made, any inducements. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I told you I barely knew them. I presented my research at a conference and one of their diplomats, Counselor Vorlag, expressed interest. He offered a grant, a substantial one, to continue my work on xenolinguistics. In exchange for what?" Greg pressed, his voice like steel. "In exchange for progress reports, just keeping him informed of my findings." Sarah wrung her hands, her voice barely a whisper. Greg nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I want Vorlag investigated. Every communication, every transaction, every shadow he's cast on Earth. Leave no stone unturned." He turned to Colonel Evans, his second in command. "I want to know what kind of game this diplomat was playing." On Ganymede, Dr. Aris, his face etched with fierce dedication, surveyed the devastation. "They knew exactly what they were doing," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the whine of the repair drones. "They targeted Lab 7, nothing else mattered." He turned to a junior researcher, his eyes blazing with intensity. "Tell me again, what was in Lab 7? "The quantum entanglement communicator, Doctor, the prototype. It was almost ready." The researcher's voice cracked with emotion. Doctor. HBACK. Dr. Aris stood before Greg, a holographic projection of the quantum entanglement device shimmering between them. "This, Greg, is a game changer. Instantaneous communication across any distance, undetectable by conventional means. It would allow us to coordinate our defenses, to anticipate their moves, to fight back effectively." Greg studied the intricate device, his mind racing with possibilities. How close are we? Weeks, maybe months, but once it's operational, the Arcturians won't know what hit them. End flashback. Greg's fist slammed against the table, the sound echoing in the sterile conference room. They didn't just want to stop us from using it. They wanted the technology. They needed it to disrupt our command and control, to isolate our forces, to cripple us. He looked around the table, his gaze hardening. "They want to blind us, then bleed us dry. We feed them something else, Greg said, a grim smile playing on his lips. Something tasty. He turned to Colonel Evans. Operation Trojan Horse. I want Sarah put under surveillance 24/7. But let her make contact. Let her feed them the information they want. Deep within the shattered remains of the research station, Thea hugged the shadows, her Arcturian disguise offering little protection against the ever-present patrols. She reached a pre-designated rendezvous point, a hidden comms terminal salvaged from the wreckage. With trembling hands, she activated the device, bypassing the Arcturian firewalls and transmitting the data chip's contents to a hidden human relay station orbiting Jupiter. The sabotage was confirmed. The Arcturians were not just negligent, they were actively trying to eliminate humanity. Back on Luna, Greg initiated Operation Trojan Horse. Sarah, her movements carefully monitored, contacted Counselor Vorlag. She transmitted the fabricated battle plans, a large-scale offensive against the lightly defended Arcturian mining colony on Cygnus X1. The bait was cast. In orbit above Cygnus X1, Arcturian Command meticulously analyzed the intercepted human battle plans. Commander Rixus, his chitinous face impassive, addressed his bridge crew. The humans are predictable. They believe us to be focused on defense, on resource acquisition. They assume our mining colonies are vulnerable. He paused, a flicker of amusement in his multifaceted eyes. Let them believe it. Significant Arcturian forces began diverting towards Cygnus X1, bolstering the colony's defenses. Human intelligence confirmed the troop movements. Operation Trojan Horse appeared to be working. But it was a lie. Unbeknownst to Greg, Commander Rixus had anticipated the human deception. The intercepted battle plans were a carefully crafted fabrication, designed to lure humanity into a trap. While the bulk of the Arcturian fleet gravitated towards Cygnus X1, a smaller, more agile force slipped past human defenses, their trajectory set for a single, critical target, the hidden human relay station near Jupiter. Without warning, the relay station, a vital link in humanity's communication network, erupted in a blinding flash of light. The Arcturian strike force had struck with ruthless efficiency, obliterating the station and severing contact with Thea. The early warning system, reliant on the relay station's sophisticated sensors, went dark. On Luna, Greg stared at the flickering holographic display, his face ashen. A terse message scrolled across the screen. Relay station Omega destroyed. Contact lost with operative Thea. Long-range sensors detecting massive Arcturian fleet bypassing defenses. Trajectory, Earth. On Earth, the news rippled like a shockwave. The Arcturian fleet, no longer a theoretical threat, was real, approaching, and hungry. Panic blossomed in the streets. Faces, glued to public holo screens, reflected the grim countdown. Supermarkets were stripped bare. Traffic snarled as people desperately tried to flee to perceived safe zones, only to find them already overflowing. Global mobilization commenced with a fervor unseen in centuries. Recruitment centers, once quiet outposts, became hives of activity, lines snaking around city blocks. Young and old, men and women, all driven by a primal urge to defend their home, volunteered for military service. Factories that once churned out consumer goods now roared with the production of weapons and defense systems. Old warships were pulled from mothballs, dusted off, and refitted with the latest technology. Patriotic anthems blared from every speaker, a desperate attempt to unify a planet teetering on the brink of chaos. In the war room, Greg watched the holographic projections of the approaching fleet, his teeth gritted. Operation Trojan Horse had been a catastrophic failure. An annoying suspicion about Sarah burrowed deeper into his gut. Her calm demeanor, her unwavering confidence, now seemed like a carefully constructed facade. He replayed their conversations in his mind, searching for clues, for any hint of deception. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, the same icy dread he'd felt before ambushes on forgotten battlefields. "Get me Sarah," he barked, his voice raspy. "I want her in custody now, high priority, use extreme prejudice if necessary." But Sarah was gone. Like smoke in the wind, she'd vanished from her apartment, leaving behind no trace. The surveillance logs were wiped clean. It was a professional job, too clean. She was a ghost, a phantom, and the realization hit Greg like a physical blow. He'd been played. Analysis of the attack on the relay station painted a grim picture. The Arcturians hadn't just used cloaking technology. They deployed a new variant, one that masked not only visual and sensor signatures, but also quantum entanglement. It was a technological leap that had caught humanity completely off guard. In labs across the globe, human scientists worked around the clock, fueled by caffeine and desperation, to develop countermeasures. They pushed the boundaries of known physics, tearing apart theories and rebuilding them from scratch. But time was a luxury they didn't have. The Arcturian fleet was closing in, each passing hour bringing Earth closer to the brink. Then came the chilling revelation. The Arcturian fleet's primary target wasn't just Earth. It was Earth's primary quantum entanglement research facility, nestled deep beneath the mountains of Geneva. A single, devastating strike and humanity would lose its ability to communicate faster than light. Earth and its colonies would be isolated, vulnerable, easy prey. Understanding slammed into Greg with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about retribution. It was about crippling humanity, cutting them off from the rest of the galaxy. He needed to buy Earth time, a chance to prepare its defenses, to find a way to fight back. He needed a diversion. "I want a strike force assembled," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion. A small, highly skilled team, their target the Arcturian homeworld. A collective gasp filled the war room. It was a suicide mission, pure and simple. The strike force would be heavily outnumbered, facing the full might of the Arcturian defenses. But it was the only chance, a desperate gamble to draw the fleet away from Earth. Far above, orbiting the ruined relay station, Thea coughed, the metallic tang of blood filling her mouth. The station was a graveyard of twisted metal and flickering emergency lights. She was alone, stranded with little hope of rescue. But Thea was nothing if not resourceful. She scavenged for supplies, rationing the meager food and water she found. Her primary goal, find a way to contact Greg. Deep within the wreckage, she stumbled upon a hidden compartment. Inside, she found an emergency communication beacon, a relic from a bygone era. It was damaged, its power cells drained, but it was a chance. The activation sequence, however, was a complex series of quantum calculations, a puzzle designed to prevent accidental activation. Hours turned into an eternity as Thea worked, her fingers numb, her mind racing. She bypassed damaged circuits, rerouted power, and painstakingly entered the activation codes. Finally, with a surge of energy, the beacon sputtered to life, sending a fragmented message into the void. Back on Earth, the garbled transmission crackled through the comms system. It was barely intelligible, a jumble of static and distorted sounds. But Greg recognized Thea's voice, and within the chaos he deciphered a chilling warning. Trap, homeworld, not real target, Earth defenses. The blood drained from Greg's face. Thea's message confirmed his worst fears. The Arcturians were leading them into a trap. The strike force was walking into a slaughter. He stood at a crossroads, the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Abort the mission and risk Earth's destruction, or proceed and sacrifice the strike force, buying Earth a fighting chance. He closed his eyes, picturing the faces of the volunteer pilots and engineers, their courage, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of humanity. He couldn't let their sacrifice be in vain. "Maintain course," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Godspeed." In the hangar bays, the human strike force, composed of volunteer pilots and engineers, prepared for their mission. They knew the odds were stacked against them, that they were likely flying to their deaths. But they faced the unknown with a stoic drive. their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and commitment. They were humanity's last hope, a desperate gamble against impossible odds. Meanwhile, light years away, Sarah contacted Arcturian Command, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. "I have crucial intelligence regarding Earth's defenses. I require safe passage off-world in exchange." News reports flashed across every screen, detailing the mass evacuations underway. Coastal cities, once bustling hubs of human activity, were now choked with vehicles crawling inland, fleeing the projected impact zones. Makeshift shelters overflowed, the air thick with the stench of fear and desperation. A young mother clutched her child, her eyes glued to the sky, searching for any sign of the impending doom. An old man, his face etched with the wisdom of a long life, stared blankly ahead, resigned to his fate. High above, Earth's orbital defense grid activated. Automated railguns, powered by massive solar arrays, tracked the incoming Arcturian fleet. Energy weapon platforms, humming with stored power, stood ready to unleash devastating blasts. The combined might of human ingenuity, a desperate gamble against an overwhelming force. The first Arcturian scout ships, sleek and menacing, pierced Earth's atmosphere. They danced through the upper layers, testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. A volley of railgun projectiles streaked across the void, intercepting the scouts with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions rippled through space as the alien ships were vaporized, their burning wreckage scattering across the sky. But the main Arcturian fleet, a vast armada of warships, remained on course, an inexorable tide of destruction. In a dimly lit hangar, Greg stood before a squadron of pilots, their faces grim but resolute. "You know the risks," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "This is a one-way trip, but if we can cripple their energy grid, we can buy Earth some time. Time to evacuate, time to prepare. Your sacrifice will not be in vain." He looked into each of their eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. He found only persistence. The strike force departed in a squadron of heavily modified stealth fighters, their hulls shimmering with advanced cloaking technology. They slipped through the orbital defenses, hugging the curvature of the Earth, then accelerating towards the vast expanse of space, heading towards the Arcturian homeworld, a desperate gamble against impossible odds. Back on Earth, in a secure underground facility, Sarah stared at the holographic schematics of the defense grid. Her hands trembled as she input a series of commands, creating blind spots in the system, vulnerabilities for the Arcturian fleet to exploit. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have no choice." Arcturian fighters, guided by Sarah's intel, exploited these blind spots, launching a surprise attack on key defense installations. The Quantum Entanglement Research Facility in Geneva, a vital link in Earth's faster-than-light communication network, came under heavy assault. Energy blasts tore through the facility, shattering windows and igniting fires. Inside, scientists worked frantically to transfer vital data to off-site backups, their fingers flying across keyboards, their faces illuminated by the flickering screens. "Almost there," one of them shouted, his voice strained. "Just a few more minutes." But the Arcturian assault was relentless. Far from Earth, the strike force encountered an Arcturian patrol fleet near Jupiter. A fierce dogfight erupted, lasers crisscrossing the void, explosions rocking the human fighters. Several human ships were destroyed, their pilots swallowed by the cold vacuum of space. But the remaining ships, battered but unbowed, managed to break through the Arcturian line, pressing onward towards their target. Adrift in space, Thea floated in a damaged Arcturian escape pod, its life support systems failing. Using her engineering skills, she managed to repair the communication systems, her fingers working with desperate speed. She sent a distress signal to any human ships within range, her voice filled with hope and desperation. "This is Thea," she said. "I need help. Please, anyone, respond." On Earth, Sarah transmitted updated defense grid schematics to the Arcturian fleet, further weakening Earth's defenses. The Arcturian fleet unleashed a wave of energy weapons, overwhelming the remaining defenses around Geneva. The quantum entanglement research facility was destroyed in a blinding flash of light, severing Earth's faster-than-light communication. Humanity was now alone. The strike force reached the Arcturian homeworld, a massive planet bathed in the light of its binary suns. They began their attack run on the primary energy grid, their stealth fighters screaming through the atmosphere, a handful of human ships against an entire civilization. Darkness. The Arcturian homeworld, once bathed in the eerie green glow of its artificial suns, was now fractured by gaping pockets of absolute night. Power conduits, severed by the human strike force, sparked and sputtered, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the alien cityscape. Sirens wailed, a discordant symphony of panic echoing through the darkened canyons of towering structures. Essential services, from atmospheric regulators to waste recycling, sputtered and died. Above, the remnants of the human fighters scattered, pursued by a swarm of vengeful Arcturian interceptors. Energy blasts streaked across the sky, each a fleeting promise of annihilation. Greg Jones, piloting his heavily damaged fighter, fought desperately to evade the relentless barrage. Warning lights blared on his console, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the cockpit. An energy bolt slammed into his port engine, sending him spiraling out of control. "Mayday, mayday, this is Reaper 1-1, I'm going down." Greg shouted into the comms, his voice tight with adrenaline. He wrestled with the controls, desperately trying to regain control, but it was no use. The fighter plunged through the atmosphere, a burning meteor hurtling towards the icy plains below. The impact was violent. Pain exploded in Greg's skull as his fighter slammed into the frozen ground. The cockpit filled with smoke, and the emergency lights flickered erratically. He struggled to unbuckle his harness, his body screaming in protest. "Damn it," he groaned, pulling himself free of the wreckage. "Not how I planned to spend my Tuesday." Most of the strike force was gone. A handful of pilots, their fighters battered and limping, managed to escape back to Earth, carrying with them tales of the daring raid and the devastating blackout. But the victory felt hollow. Back on Earth, news of the successful attack on the Arcturian homeworld was initially met with jubilation. Cheers erupted in the streets, and flags waved defiantly in the wind. But the euphoria was short-lived. A grim-faced General Williams appeared on global news channels. "I regret to inform you that our quantum entanglement facility has been destroyed," he announced, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We have lost all faster-than-light communication with our colonies and allied systems." Panic gripped the planet. The lifeline to the stars severed. Governments declared a state of emergency, and martial law was imposed in many major cities. The familiar hum of civilization was replaced by the ominous silence of uncertainty. Meanwhile, investigations into the destruction of the quantum entanglement facility revealed a shocking truth. Sarah, the scientist with access to the facility, had deliberately sabotaged it. Her motives were chilling. Deep-seated resentment towards the government, which she blamed for the death of her family during a resource war, had festered into a burning desire for revenge. She believed that humanity was inherently flawed, that only through subservience to a superior power could it survive the coming storm. Thousands of kilometers away, Thea watched the news reports with growing horror. She had to do something. She accessed a secure terminal and brought up a schematic of Greg's fighter. A faint signal pulsed from a hidden tracking device she had implanted before he left, a precaution she couldn't explain even to herself. "He's alive," she whispered, a surge of persistence coursing through her veins. Defying direct orders, Thea stole a small Arcturian reconnaissance ship, a sleek, agile vessel designed for scouting and surveillance. "I'm sorry," she murmured to the empty hangar, but I can't stand by and watch him die. Greg, shivering in the sub-zero temperatures, stumbled across a peculiar structure half buried in the ice. It was an Arcturian research facility, its entrance concealed beneath a thick layer of snow. He managed to force his way inside, finding himself in a vast underground complex filled with humming machinery and strange energy conduits. He quickly realized what it was: a facility dedicated to developing advanced energy weapons, technology the Arcturians were deliberately hiding from the galactic community. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Greg turned to see a massive energy shield shimmering into existence, sealing off the entire facility. He fired his sidearm at it, but the energy bolts dissipated harmlessly against the barrier. Impenetrable. Back in space, Thea intercepted a faint distress signal, barely audible above the static. It was Greg. His coordinates confirmed his location near the research facility. "I'm coming," she vowed, her hands tightening on the controls. On Earth, Sarah broadcast a coded message to the Arcturian fleet, providing them with the precise location of remaining human-resistant cells. The Arcturian fleet, emboldened by the destruction of the quantum entanglement facility, began targeting these cells with ruthless efficiency, further weakening Earth's ability to fight back. Thea's ship was intercepted by an Arcturian patrol, two sleek fighters that emerged from the darkness like predatory birds. "This is Arcturian Patrol Vessel Gamma 9, a voice crackled over the comms. "Halt immediately and prepare to be boarded." Thea ignored the order. Engaging the ship's thrusters, she launched into a series of evasive maneuvers, dodging energy blasts with practiced skill. A desperate dogfight ensued, the fate of Greg and perhaps humanity hanging in the balance. She managed to evade the patrol, but not without cost. Energy bolts ripped through her ship's hull and warning lights flashed across the console. "Shields at 14%, the computer warned. "Hull integrity compromised. Power levels critical." The ship began to lose power, drifting helplessly through the vast emptiness of space. The cold bit through Greg's tattered flight suit, each gust of wind a fresh assault. He coughed, the metallic tang of blood coating his tongue. The recycled water tasted like stale minerals, but it was enough to keep him moving. He scanned the wreckage of his fighter, his gaze settling on a panel ripped loose from the console. Salvageable. He pried it open, his fingers numb, and extracted a handful of power cells. As he worked, he noticed something odd. A faint energy signature, almost imperceptible, emanating from the rocks near the Arcturian research facility. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt artificial. He moved closer, his hand resting on the hilt of the salvaged vibro knife. Concealed beneath a rock overhang, he found it, a shimmering distortion in the air, a hidden portal humming with barely suppressed energy. Inside the fighter's cockpit, he found a damaged datapad. The screen flickered erratically, displaying fragmented schematics. He focused on the energy shield diagram, his eyes scanning for vulnerabilities. There it was, a highlighted frequency, a resonance point. Exploit it and the shield might just crack. A tremor shook the ground. In the distance, a plume of smoke billowed into the alien sky. Another crash. Thea regained consciousness with a gasp. Acrid smoke filled the cockpit, stinging her eyes. Her ship was a mangled wreck, twisted metal groaning under the strain. Warning lights flashed, painting the interior in a disorienting strobe. She was alive but trapped. She activated the emergency beacon, knowing the risk. Every pulse was a signal, a desperate plea, and a potential death sentence. Thea didn't have to wait long. A guttural growl echoed from the shadows. 3 creatures emerged, their chitinous bodies glistening in the dim light. They were indigenous to this world, their eyes burning with a cold, predatory intelligence. They advanced, weapons drawn. Thea grabbed a damaged Arcturian pulse rifle, its casing cracked and sparking. She fired a single shot into the ground, the energy blast leaving a smoking crater. The creatures recoiled. She quickly recalibrated the weapon, modifying its targeting matrix. She aimed at a distant rock formation, firing again. This time the blast selectively disintegrated the rock, leaving the surrounding vegetation untouched. She looked at the creatures, then back at the modified rifle, a shared enemy, a potential alliance. On Earth, the news broadcasts showed long lines outside rationing centers. Families huddled together in bomb shelters, their faces etched with fear. The Arcturian blockade was tightening its grip. In the communication center, technicians swarmed around the damaged FTL transmitter. Sparks flew as they desperately tried to reroute circuits, bypass damaged components. Sarah's sabotage had been thorough, insidious. The news of Sarah's betrayal spread like wildfire. Initial shock gave way to a cold, burning rage. She chose them over us. A technician snarled, smacking his head on a console. Then let's show those Arcturian bastards what human grit really means. Greg picked up the faint signal, Thea's beacon. It was weak, barely audible above the background static. He knew it was a trap, a lure to draw him out, but he couldn't ignore it, not Thea. He checked his salvaged pulse rifle, loaded a fresh power cell. Time to dance with the devil. He moved through the alien landscape like a ghost, his senses heightened, his movements fluid and silent. He used the sparse vegetation and the jagged terrain to his advantage, slipping past Arcturian patrols, a shadow among shadows. Thea offered one of the creatures the modified rifle. It examined the weapon, its multifaceted eyes gleaming with understanding. It grunted, then gestured towards a dark opening in the rock face. A tunnel, a path. The air grew heavy, the ground vibrated with approaching footsteps. The Arcturian patrol was closing in, drawn by the beacon's signal. The creatures tensed, their claws extended, ready to fight. Greg burst from the shadows, firing a volley of pulse rounds. The Arcturian patrol scattered, caught by surprise. He tossed a salvaged grenade, the explosion creating a blinding flash and a cloud of choking smoke. "Thea, now!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. Thea and the creatures scrambled into the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness. Greg laid down suppressing fire, keeping the Arcturians at bay. He retreated, diving into the tunnel just as the Arcturian reinforcements arrived. Pulse fire ripped through the air, illuminating the entrance. Greg and Thea met in the darkness, a brief, wordless exchange of relief. But their respite was short-lived. The sound of approaching Arcturian troops echoed through the tunnel. They emerged into a small cavern, the creatures flanking them, weapons raised. The Arcturians poured into the cavern, their weapons spitting energy. The battle was joined. As they fought, one of the creatures chittered urgently, pointing towards a narrow crevice in the cavern wall, a hidden passage leading deeper into the mountain. "Facility," Thea translated, her voice strained. "Entrance." Hidden, the tunnel air hung thick and cold, each breath a rasp in Greg's throat. Water trickled down the slick rock walls, echoing the frantic skittering of the indigenous creatures leading their desperate flight. Thea's hand brushed his arm, a silent reassurance in the oppressive darkness. The lead creature chirped, halting abruptly before a seemingly solid wall. This is the way." Greg asked, his voice low, doubting. Thea examined the surface, a faint seam barely visible in the dim light. It's shielded, a hidden entrance, but she paused, her brow furrowing. It requires a specific Arcturian energy signature to unlock. Without it, we're stuck. Greg cursed under his breath. "So, we need to go back out there." "Not necessarily," Thea said, her eyes gleaming with a spark of tenacity. "We need to acquire one." Her gaze drifted towards the distant sounds of the Arcturian patrol, their heavy boots thudding against the metal floor. Someone needs to get close enough to scan their equipment. Greg's mind focused. "I'll go." His special forces training hadn't entirely deserted him, even after all these years. Stealth was still a language he spoke fluently. Thea nodded, already turning her attention to the scavenged fighter parts. "I can modify one of the disruptors to scramble their long-range sensors. It will give you a window." Her hands moved with practiced speed, rerouting power conduits and calibrating frequencies. Just enough cover to get in, get the signature, and get out. An hour later, cloaked in shadow and fueled by unyielding commitment, Greg moved like a ghost through the Arcturian facility. The modified disruptor emitted a low hum, a silent promise of interference. He stalked the patrol, his senses honed, adrenaline sharpening his focus. He waited for the opportune moment, a blind corner, a momentary lapse in vigilance, then struck. A swift takedown, a snatched energy signature device, and he was gone again, melting back into the darkness. But as he slipped away, a flicker on the device's screen caught his eye. A new type of sensor reading. Arcturian. Biosignatures, human biosignatures. He relayed the information to Thea, his voice tight with urgency. They're developing new sensors, ones that can detect us. Thea swore in Arcturian, a string of guttural sounds that conveyed her frustration. Damn it, it's still in the prototype phase, but it won't take them long to deploy it. She worked feverishly, her fingers flying across the salvaged tech. I can create a temporary countermeasure, a dampener that will mask our genetic markers. For a while, but it's a stopgap, nothing more. They reached the hidden entrance, only to find it wasn't as hidden as they'd hoped. A heavily guarded security checkpoint blocked their path, 2 Arcturian soldiers standing sentinel before a shimmering energy field. The indigenous creatures, understanding the situation, chittered amongst themselves. With a final, determined shriek, a dozen of them darted from the shadows, launching themselves at the guards. The Arcturians roared in surprise, their weapons firing wildly as the creatures swarmed them, a chaotic blur of claws and teeth. Now, Greg yelled, activating the stolen energy signature device. Thea adjusted the dampener, bathing them in a field of interference. They sprinted towards the checkpoint, Greg holding his breath, expecting the alarm to blare at any moment. The energy field flickered, then dissolved as the Arcturian signature took hold. They slipped through, unnoticed, into the darkness beyond. Just as they caught their breath, a burst of static filled the air. Thea scrambled to adjust her makeshift comm system. A fragmented voice, distorted but recognizable, crackled through. Earth, sensors, bio, signature, counter. Measures, urgent. It's a message from Earth, Thea stammered, her eyes wide. They know about the sensors, they're trying to warn us. The urgency in the message was palpable, but before they could decipher more, the signal died, swallowed by the static. As if in response to the failed transmission, the ground trembled. The low rumble grew into a deafening roar. Above them, the facility's lights flickered and died, plunging them into near darkness. Arcturian warships, Thea whispered, her voice filled with dread. They're attacking Earth. Inside the facility, they pressed on, deeper into the labyrinthine corridors. They found what they were looking for, the power source for the energy weapon. A massive chamber filled with pulsing energy conduits, all converging on a central platform. And on that platform, a creature, but not an Arcturian. It was alien, unlike anything Greg had ever seen. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its skin shimmered with an iridescent light, its eyes large and filled with an unbearable sadness. It was connected to the conduits by a network of wires, its body trembling with the strain. What is that? Greg breathed, horrified. Thea's voice was barely a whisper. That's an empath, a species known for their incredible ability to sense and project emotions. Her voice cracked. They're using it as a battery, torturing it to amplify the weapon's power. Greg stared at the creature, a wave of nausea washing over him. The cruelty was unfathomable. You knew about this? Greg asked, his voice dangerously low. Thea flinched, her bioluminescent skin paling. I suspected the rumors. I tried to ignore them. She looked away, shame etched on her face. My family. They were involved in setting up these energy extraction facilities. I didn't want to believe it was this. Barbaric. The weight of her revelation hung heavy in the air, a chasm opening between them. But there was no time for recriminations. We have to help it, Greg said, his voice firm, his gaze fixed on the suffering creature. "We can't leave it like this." Thea nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and dedication. "But if we disconnect it, the entire facility will go on alert." As if on cue, the indigenous creatures reappeared, their chirps urgent. One of them gestured towards a damaged control panel, wires sparking. They had disabled a section of the facility's power grid, creating a window of opportunity. Greg looked at Thea, a silent question passing between them. They knew what they had to do. He gripped his weapon, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Thea began rerouting power conduits, preparing to sever the empath's connection. The indigenous creatures readied themselves for battle. As Thea reached for the final connection, a surge of emotion, hope, fear, desperate anticipation flooded Greg's mind. The enslaved species sensed their actions, understood their intent. Then, a deafening alarm blared through the facility. They had been detected. The klaxon blared, a deafening shriek that vibrated through Greg's bones. Red emergency lights strobed, painting the sterile corridors in a hellish glow. Blast doors slammed shut with metallic finality, sealing off sections of the facility, cutting off their intended escape route. A wave of nausea washed over Greg, a psychic pressure that threatened to buckle his knees. He saw Thea stumble, clutching her head. Around them, the Arcturian guards froze, their multifaceted eyes wide with confusion, hands flying to their temples as if warding off a blow. The enslaved empathic species, finally aware of Greg and Thea's purpose, had unleashed a surge of raw psychic energy. "Now!" Greg roared, snapping Thea out of her daze. He charged, his combat knife a blur in the flashing light. The stunned guards were easy targets. A quick jab to the throat, a disarming strike, a sickening crunch of bone years often, aiming kicking in. Thea, surprisingly agile, used a discarded energy pistol as a club, felling another guard with a precise blow to the head. The indigenous creatures, sensing their chance, darted forward, their sharp claws and teeth finding purchase in the Arcturians' exposed limbs. They knew the layout of the facility. Greg and Thea followed their lead. They reached the central chamber. A horrifying sight greeted them. Dozens of beings, each from a different species, were suspended in nutrient-filled tanks, their bodies riddled with wires and tubes. Neural implants, glowing with malevolent energy, pierced their skulls, connecting them directly to the massive energy weapon that dominated the room. Thea rushed to the nearest console, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "They're physically connected," she gasped, "through these neural implants. The weapon, it's powered by their minds." Her fingers danced across the console. "I can sever the connections, but there's a fail-safe. If I tamper with the implants directly, they'll overload. It'll kill them all." Greg scanned the room, his mind racing. "We need to disrupt the fail-safe." He spotted the facility's power grid schematic on a nearby display. "I can reroute the power, overload the system, create a surge. It'll buy you time to disconnect them safely." While Greg worked, Thea continued her analysis. "This weapon," she said, her voice tight with horror, "it's not just designed to destroy. It's meant to inflict immense psychic trauma, to break entire populations, to leave them shattered." Greg grunted, wrestling with the archaic Arcturian power conduits. Sparks flew as he forced the connections. Almost there. He slammed the final conduit into place. The room flickered, then plunged into momentary darkness before the emergency lights kicked back on, brighter than before. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a screeching alarm unlike any they'd heard before. "Secondary alarm," Thea shouted, "and they've disabled my countermeasures. The biosignature sensors are back online. They know we're here." A voice boomed over the comm system, cold and devoid of emotion. "Intruders detected. Secure the energy weapon. Eliminate all hostiles." The blast doors at the far end of the chamber hissed open, revealing a squad of heavily armed Arcturian guards, led by a towering figure in black armor. The Arcturian overseer, his mandibles clicking with anticipation, surveyed the scene with ruthless efficiency. For the collective, he bellowed, and the guards opened fire. Greg dove behind a console, returning fire with his pulse rifle. Thea scrambled for cover, dodging energy bolts that sizzled through the air. The indigenous creatures, nimble and quick, used the tanks as cover, darting out to harass the Arcturians. "I need more time," Thea yelled, her fingers working frantically at the console. Greg laid down, suppressing fire, drawing the guards' attention. He risked a glance at Thea. Only a few more connections remained. He needed a diversion. As if answering his unspoken plea, the indigenous creatures launched a coordinated attack. They disappeared into the network of tunnels beneath the chamber, emerging behind the Arcturian guards, slashing at their exposed backs. The guards, caught off guard, faltered. "Now!" Greg shouted, seizing the opportunity. He charged forward, firing on the move, clearing a path to Thea. She ripped the last neural connection free just as the Arcturian overseer rounded the corner, his energy pistol leveled at her head. "Too late," he snarled and squeezed the trigger. The weapon sputtered, died. The overseer stared at it, bewildered. "Self-destruct sequence initiated," a synthesized voice announced. T-minus 60 seconds. Greg tackled the overseer, sending them both crashing to the ground. Thea, grabbing the arms of the freed enslaved species, urged them towards the tunnels. The indigenous creatures led the way. The chamber began to shake. Warning lights flashed. The countdown ticked relentlessly. Greg rained blows on the overseer's armored face, but the Arcturian was strong, his movements precise and deadly. He blocked a punch, then banged his hand into Greg's jaw. Greg staggered back, dazed. "You cannot stop progress," the overseer hissed, raising his fist for the final blow. The world exploded. A searing wave of heat and force ripped through the chamber, throwing Greg against a wall. The last thing he saw was the overseer, engulfed in flames. He woke to the sound of ringing in his ears and the smell of burning metal. The chamber was a ruin, a twisted landscape of mangled machinery and shattered tanks. He coughed, spitting out blood. "Greg," Thea's voice, faint but clear, reached him through the chaos. "This way, the tunnels." He stumbled to his feet, following her voice. The tunnels were dark and claustrophobic, the air thick with smoke and dust. He could hear the sounds of pursuit, the heavy thud of Arcturian boots, the crackle of energy weapons. As they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, Greg noticed something. The Arcturians seemed to be tracking them with unnerving accuracy. "They're not just following us," he said, his voice hoarse. "They're hunting us." Thea frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're using a bioscanner, targeting human life signs." Thea's eyes widened. "Damn it, the failsafe must have failed. It should have masked our signatures within the complex, but the explosion must have reset it." "Can you counteract it?" Greg asked, his hand instinctively reaching for his pulse rifle. "There's a mineral," one of the indigenous creatures chirped, its antennae twitching. "Deep within the tunnels, it can mask biosignatures. Completely." "Lead the way," Greg said, his eyes narrowed. The creature scurried forward, disappearing into the darkness. They followed deeper and deeper into the bowels of the facility. They reached a hidden chamber, its walls shimmering with crystalline formations. The mineral, a rare iridescent substance, pulsed with a faint light. But the chamber was not empty. A low growl echoed through the cavern, and a pair of luminous eyes blinked into existence in the darkness. A territorial predator, disturbed from its slumber. "We need to be quick," Thea whispered. But it was too late. A piercing shriek filled the chamber. The bioscanner had locked on. They were out of time. "Dust yourselves, now," Greg barked, his voice barely a whisper above the dripping water. The enslaved species, a motley collection of insectoids, humanoids, and beings that defied easy categorization, scrambled to obey. The mineral dust, fine as powdered bone, clung to their skin, a gritty film that smelled faintly of ozone and decay. Greg smeared it across his face, the cool dust a stark contrast to the sweat beading on his brow. Thea worked quickly beside him, coating her own iridescent skin. "It'll only buy us a few minutes," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Arcturian bioscanners are sophisticated. Above them, the rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoed through the tunnel. The Overseer's voice, amplified by his suit's comm system, cut through the silence. "Report." A guttural response crackled back. "Life signs, fluctuating, negative, sector clear." A moment of tense silence, then a frustrated roar. "Impossible, rescan." There were dozens. Greg seized the opportunity. "The tunnel supports," he muttered, pointing to a series of corroded metal struts. "They're unstable. The Arcturians weakened them during the mining. Thea, can you trigger a collapse?" Thea nodded, her fingers flying across her wrist-mounted device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by a series of groans and the sickening crunch of metal. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The Overseer's enraged bellow echoed through the tunnels. "Cave in, seal the sector." The collapse bought them time, but it also sealed off their original escape route. Greg cursed under his breath. "Damn it, they'll reroute. We have to keep moving." The indigenous creatures, sensing the shift in the tunnels, began to lead the way, their bioluminescent markings pulsing with increasing speed. They veered off the main path, plunging into a network of smaller, darker tunnels. The air grew thick with the musty odor of ancient stone. The tunnels opened into a vast chamber, its walls covered in intricate carvings that predated the harsh, utilitarian architecture of the Arcturians. Deactivated consoles lined the walls, their surfaces covered in a layer of dust that seemed to hum with dormant energy. This place. It was old, older than anything Thea had ever encountered. "What is this place?" Greg asked, his voice hushed with awe. Thea ran a hand across a console, her eyes wide with wonder. "An ancient defense system," she breathed. "Laser grids, energy barriers. Incredibly advanced technology, but it's all offline. Can you reactivate it?" "Maybe," Thea said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "But the security protocols are complex. I'll need time." "We don't have time," Greg countered, glancing back towards the tunnel entrance. The sounds of the Overseer's pursuit were growing closer. "But we can make some." He pointed to a narrow corridor, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The corridor, the laser grids, set a trap. Thea nodded, her fingers already flying across the console. Greg took point, leading the group into the corridor. The air crackled with static electricity as Thea bypassed the security protocols, one by one. Suddenly, the corridor shimmered with a web of crimson light. Laser grids, invisible to the naked eye, sliced through the air. The Overseer's voice, closer now, echoed through the tunnels. "They're trapped. Seal the corridor." Then screams, the high-pitched whine of energy weapons and the sickening sizzle of flesh. The laser grids were working. A moment later, the lasers flickered and died. The Overseer, his armor scorched and smoking, staggered into the corridor, his face contorted with rage. Several of his guards lay dead or dying, their bodies riddled with laser burns. You will pay for that, human," he snarled, raising his energy weapon. "Not today," Greg growled, firing a series of shots from his pulse rifle. The Overseer ducked behind a shattered console, returning fire. They pressed on, the sounds of the firefight fading behind them. The indigenous creatures led them to a massive underground chasm, spanned by a dilapidated bridge constructed of what looked like woven vines and hardened resin. The chasm stretched into darkness, its depths impossible to discern. The indigenous creatures stopped at the edge of the bridge, their bioluminescent markings flickering erratically. They refused to cross, their bodies trembling with fear. "They sense danger," Thea said, her voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the chasm. "Something's down there." Greg took a deep breath. "We have no choice. We cross." He stepped onto the bridge, testing its stability. The vines creaked and groaned under his weight. He motioned for the freed slaves to follow. As the first few began to cross, a tremor shook the bridge. Cracks spiderwebbed across the vine supports. The enslaved species cried out in fear. From the depths of the chasm, a swarm of insectoid creatures emerged, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the dim light. They were drawn by the energy signatures of the enslaved species, their multifaceted eyes glinting with predatory hunger. The insectoids began attacking the bridge, their mandibles snapping at the vines. The structure swayed precariously. "Thea, get them across." Greg yelled, grabbing a large chunk of debris and wedging it into a gap in the bridge. "I'll cover you." He ripped open a pouch on his belt, scattering the remaining mineral dust into the air. The cloud of dust obscured his heat signature, creating a temporary diversion. Thea and the enslaved species scrambled across the bridge, their movements frantic. The insectoids swarmed around Greg, their clicking mandibles a terrifying symphony of death. The overseer, his armor riddled with bullet holes, emerged from the tunnel, his energy weapon raised. Nowhere left to run, human. Greg knew he was trapped. The bridge was collapsing, the insectoids were closing in, and the overseer was bearing down on him. He had one chance. He grabbed a length of broken vine, wrapped it around a jagged piece of debris, and swung it like a grappling hook towards the other side of the chasm. He launched himself into the air, the vine singing as it stretched taut. He slammed into the far side of the chasm, the impact knocking the wind out of him. The vine snapped and the bridge collapsed behind him, sending a cloud of dust and insectoids into the abyss. He looked back. The overseer stood at the edge of the chasm, his face a mask of fury. "This isn't over, human." Greg coughed, spitting out dust. "It is for you," he muttered, turning and following Thea and the freed slaves into a narrow tunnel that led away from the chasm. The tunnel opened into a small chamber where a hidden exit led to the surface, but the exit was guarded by an automated Arcturian patrol drone, its energy weapon humming with power. As they prepared to confront the drone, Thea gasped, "Greg, look!" The enslaved species were huddled together, their bodies trembling, but something was different. They were emitting a faint, pulsating light, a coordinated psychic pulse that resonated with the very air around them. The air crackled. A high-pitched whine, almost imperceptible, vibrated through Greg's teeth. The Arcturian patrol drone, previously a steady sentinel in the sky, stuttered mid-air. Its smooth, obsidian surface flickered with internal light as it began to spin erratically, its repulsor lifts fighting for purchase. "A coordinated psychic pulse," Thea murmured, her eyes wide. "Defensive, triggered by their proximity to the energy source. The harvesters." She glanced at the freed species, their faces alight with a mixture of fear and nascent power. The drone, as if in retaliation, stabilized momentarily and emitted a piercing, high-frequency shriek. Greg clenched his teeth against the assault. His vision blurred and his balance wavered. The sound was designed to disorient, to incapacitate, but the freed species seemed unaffected, their eyes glowing faintly as the sonic waves washed over them. "It's a sonic weapon," Greg grunted, fighting to maintain focus. "Damn effective." Thea shook her head, ineffective against them, but it's a precursor. She pointed to several small ports along the drone's undercarriage. "Psi dampeners, they'll deploy them if we don't disable it quickly. They suppress psychic abilities, make them docile again." Greg cursed under his breath. He scanned the group. The freed species, energized and emboldened, were still vulnerable. He raised his hand, forming a fist, then pointed at the drone. A series of quick, precise hand signals followed, honed from years of leading special forces teams. Focus, concentrate, overload. He watched as their eyes intensified, converging on a single point on the drone's chassis. The air shimmered. A visible energy, raw and untamed, coalesced around the machine. The drone shuddered violently, sparks erupting from its seams. Then, with a final, ear-splitting screech, it exploded in a shower of metallic fragments. The blast sent a wave of heat and debris through the air. Greg grabbed Thea's arm, pulling her behind a cluster of jagged rocks. "Move, canyon now." He barked, gesturing for the others to follow. They scrambled through the uneven terrain, the canyon walls rising around them, offering a semblance of cover. The air grew cooler, the shadows deeper. "They're not just harvesting minerals," Thea said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're after something far more valuable, a rare form of psychic energy. It emanates from the planet's core." "And they're using it for?" Greg asked, his eyes scanning the canyon walls. "To power their advanced technology," Thea replied. "To enhance their own psychic abilities. It's why they've become so dominant." Greg's gaze swept over the freed species, their faces etched with a newfound understanding. That's why they targeted them. Latent psychic abilities, amplified by proximity to the source. They rounded a bend in the canyon and stumbled upon a hidden cave, its entrance almost completely obscured by overhanging rock. Strange markings adorned the walls, unlike anything Greg had ever seen. "Ancient," Thea breathed, tracing a finger across a glyph that resembled a swirling vortex. "Predates both the Arcturians and the previous civilization on this planet." The markings depicted the energy source not as a resource to be exploited but as a sentient entity. Warnings were etched into the stone: "Do not disturb. Do not consume. Imbalance will bring ruin." Thea ran a handheld scanner over the markings, its beam illuminating the intricate details. "The energy source. It's not just energy," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "It's alive. A planetary consciousness." Greg felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the freed species, their faces alight with a strange mixture of wonder and fear. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Minimize your psychic output. We don't want to attract any unwanted attention." But even as he spoke the words, he knew it might be too late. A low murmur rippled through the group. The freed species, empowered by their newfound abilities and the revelation about the energy source, were restless. They wanted to fight back, to protect their planet. Greg hesitated. He'd come here for retribution, for closure, but seeing the fire in their eyes, the raw commitment to reclaim their home. "All right," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll help you, but we do it smart. We use what you have, your abilities, strategically. There's an energy refining facility not far from here," one of the freed species said, their voice a low hum. "We could disrupt their operations, free more of our people." Thea shook her head. "The psi dampeners, if they deploy them on a larger scale, you'll be powerless." Greg nodded. "She's right. Disabling that network has to be our priority. It's a risk, but we have no choice. We need to infiltrate their command center." Suddenly, one of the freed species reached out, their hand gently touching Greg's. A jolt of energy surged through him, a rush of images flooding his mind. He saw a vast, pulsating network, a web of energy cables snaking beneath the planet's surface. He saw something else, something vast and ancient and infinitely powerful, writhing in agony. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Greg disoriented and breathless. He staggered back, his hand flying to his head. "They're not just harvesting energy," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They're draining the planet dry." "The old tunnels," the freed psychic, a being of shimmering light named Lyra, breathed, her voice echoing in Greg's mind. "They whisper of forgotten things. A path unseen yet there, a serpent's coil leading to the heart of the machine." Greg turned to Thea, his gaze sharp. "Can you confirm?" Thea accessed the planetary schematics on her wrist console, her fingers flying across the interface. "Lyra's right. Abandoned mining tunnels from the pre-Arcturian era. They intersect with the Psi-Dampener network's power conduits, a potential access point. But heavily guarded, Arcturian patrols are frequent, and the tunnels themselves, unstable." "We hit them head-on," Greg decided, his voice a low growl. "A diversion. Small team, loud, draws the heat. Thea, Lyra, you're with me. We go through the tunnels." A hulking Grondak warrior stepped forward. "I will lead the diversion, Jones. My brothers and sisters will paint the sky with illusions. The Arcturians will see what we wish them to see." The Grondak's psychic presence was a tangible force, a wave of barely controlled energy. As the diversion team moved out, preparing their psychic assault. Greg, Thea, and a handful of trusted companions descended into the maw of the old mining tunnel. The air hung thick and heavy, the scent of dust and decay clinging to everything. Patches of luminescent fungi cast an eerie green glow, revealing the tunnel's rough-hewn walls. Laser grids crisscrossed the passage, and small surveillance drones hummed in the shadows. Arcturian ingenuity, Thea muttered, her fingers already working to bypass the first laser grid. Crude but effective. She tapped a sequence into her console and the lasers flickered and died. A moment later, she'd reprogrammed one of the drones, its red eye now glowing a friendly blue. Our eyes and ears. They moved deeper, the silence broken only by the drip of water and the crunch of their boots on loose rock. These tunnels, Thea said, her voice tight, they were abandoned long ago. A series of cave-ins. The Arcturians' energy harvesting weakened the planet's crust. They didn't care, only the resources mattered. Finally, they reached the power conduits, massive pulsating cables humming with raw energy. A force field shimmered around them, guarded by automated turrets that swiveled menacingly. Thea studied the system, her brow furrowed in concentration. The security system, it's sophisticated. Relies on a specific Arcturian psychic signature to bypass the protocols. Greg's gaze hardened. Can you mimic it? Thea hesitated, her bioluminescent skin dimming. My family. They designed the psi dampeners. I know the signature, but it's risky. They'll detect me, my family. Thea, Greg said, his voice gentle but firm. Those dampeners are torturing an entire species. We have to disable them, now. Thea closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and reached out with her mind. As she began to mimic the Arcturian signature, a wave of memories crashed over her. Vivid images of her childhood, her parents, proud Arcturian engineers, beaming with pride as they presented their designs for the psi dampeners. A vital tool for maintaining order, her father had said. Ensuring the stability of our resource acquisition. Thea recoiled, the memories a bitter taste in her mouth. The force field flickered, then vanished. The turrets went silent. It's open, Thea gasped, her voice trembling. We're in. They entered the control center, a vast chamber filled with humming machinery and flickering holographic displays. Lines of code cascaded across the screens, monitoring the psychic energy levels of the freed species. But then, Thea noticed something else, a secondary system running in parallel. The energy-draining apparatus, she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. It's connected. They're not just suppressing their minds, they're draining their life force. Data streams filled the central display, showing a graph trending sharply downward. The process is accelerating, Lyra whispered, her psychic presence growing agitated. The planet, it's dying. Suddenly, alarms blared, bathing the control center in harsh red light. A synthesized voice echoed through the chamber. Intruder alert, psychic signature detected. Sector 7 compromised. They know we're here, Greg barked, drawing his weapon. Thea, disable the dampeners. Now, we'll hold them off. Arcturian security forces stormed into the control center, weapons raised. Greg, with the psychic support of Lyra and the others, met them head-on. Blasts of energy ripped through the air, illuminating the chamber in flashes of blinding light. Thea, ignoring the chaos around her, worked frantically at the control panel. Her fingers danced across the interface, bypassing security protocols and rerouting power. Finally, she hit the override switch. A surge of psychic energy erupted from the control panel, washing over the Arcturian soldiers, overwhelming their senses and sending them crashing to the ground. But the surge also destabilized the control center. The walls began to shake and chunks of rock fell from the ceiling. Thea, get out of here, Greg yelled, firing a burst of energy at an advancing Arcturian. It's going to collapse. Thea turned to flee, but a section of the ceiling gave way, sending a wall of debris crashing down between her and Greg. Greg! She cried, reaching out towards him. Go! Greg roared, his voice barely audible above the din. Save the others, I'll find a way out. Thea, tears streaming down her face, hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the remaining members of the team and fled, the ground shaking beneath their feet. She knew the Arcturians would be searching for them. She also knew she had to return for Greg. But as she escaped into the darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving him behind. Thea's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the groaning metal around her. Leave him. The thought was a brand against her conscience. Intel or not, she couldn't. "We're going back," she announced, her voice tight with a dedication that surprised even herself. A guttural protest arose from Krill, the hulking Vorak beside her, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Madness, Thea, the structure gives way. We are of no use to him dead." Thea ignored him, already retracing her steps. "Lisha, with me. Krill, take point, clear a path." The control center was a symphony of destruction. Aftershocks rattled the already weakened structure, sending cascades of debris raining down. Flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows, revealing pockets of Arcturian resistance, desperate soldiers firing blindly into the gloom. Krill and Lisha, a nimble Quillian, moved with brutal efficiency, their makeshift weapons spitting energy blasts that silenced the Arcturians. Behind a mountain of twisted girders and shattered consoles, Greg worked with a frantic energy. Sparks flew as he welded salvaged Arcturian plating to reinforce a collapsing section. He knew the structural schematics of these facilities better than the engineers who designed them, a grim legacy of his past. A low growl escaped his lips as the last support clicked into place. He squeezed through the narrow opening, emerging into a corridor choked with dust and the acrid smell of ozone. Rounding a corner, he stumbled upon an Arcturian soldier, pinned beneath a fallen beam, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. The soldier's breathing was shallow, his face contorted in pain. Greg's first instinct was to keep moving, to leave him to his fate. But something stayed his hand. He knelt beside the soldier, grunting with effort as he heaved the beam aside. The Arcturian stared up at him, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "Why? Why do you help me, human?" Greg shrugged, the motion stiff and uncomfortable. "Don't want you dying on my conscience." "Besides," he added, a flicker of something akin to a smile crossing his lips, "maybe you'll tell me where the emergency exits are." The soldier hesitated then, his voice barely a whisper, rasped, "Level 3. Secondary access, but reinforced." Meanwhile, Thea and her team navigated the treacherous corridors, their progress slow and fraught with danger. Krill stopped abruptly, his antennae twitching. "They doubt this. Human. They say he is one of the destroyers. Why risk life for him?" He gestured to the other freed species, their faces etched with suspicion. Thea whirled on him, her eyes blazing with indignation. "He saved you, Krill. He freed us all. He risked his life to shut down the energy drain. Have you forgotten so easily? He is not like them. He fights for what is right, even when it costs him everything." Her words echoed through the damaged corridor, a testament to her unwavering belief. They pressed onward, reaching a dead end. Lisha ran her delicate fingers over the wall, her antennae quivering. "A false wall. I sense a chamber beyond." With a coordinated effort, they triggered the release mechanism, revealing a hidden vault. Inside, rows of sleek black energy weapons hummed with latent power. Data consoles flickered with complex equations and schematics. Thea approached one of the consoles, her fingers flying across the controls. The data scrolled past, a horrifying revelation unfolding before her eyes. "This isn't just about draining the planet's energy," she whispered, her voice infused with dread. "They're weaponizing the core, turning the entire planet into a superweapon." At that moment, Greg stumbled into the chamber, his face grim. "The Arcturian." He confirmed it. "They're planning to detonate the core," said something about galactic dominance. Thea shook her head, her voice trembling. "It's worse than we thought, and the process. It's destabilizing the planet's magnetic field." Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury. Lightning crackled across the sky, illuminating towering waves that crashed against the control center's foundations. Volcanic vents spewed molten rock into the air, painting the sky with fire. Thea's breath hitched. My family, they were involved in this project, not just the energy draining, but this weapon. The weight of her family's legacy threatened to crush her. The sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and relentless, shattered the silence. Arcturian reinforcements. Escape was no longer an option, it was a necessity. As they turned to flee, a group of freed species emerged from the shadows, led by a hulking Grolak with eyes that gleamed with ambition. "We can help you escape," the Grolak rumbled, his voice a low growl. "But in exchange, we want the weapon." Greg's eyes narrowed. He didn't trust this Grolak. He sensed a hunger for power, a ruthlessness that mirrored the Arcturians they were fighting against. Trap, his instincts screamed. "We can't give it to you," Thea protested, her voice rising in desperation. "It's too dangerous. It could destroy entire star systems." Greg placed a hand on her arm, his gaze unwavering. "We don't have a choice, Thea. It's the only bargaining chip we have." Before they could reach a consensus, the ground beneath them shuddered violently. A massive cave-in sealed off their primary escape route, leaving them trapped. "We have no choice," Greg said grimly. He hefted the energy weapon onto his shoulder. "Brace yourselves." He fired a concentrated blast at the debris field. The weapon unleashed a torrent of raw energy, vaporizing the rock and metal in a blinding flash. The force of the blast threw them back, but a new path, albeit unstable, was open. They stumbled out of the collapsing control center and onto the ravaged surface. The air was thick with smoke and ash, the sky a swirling vortex of fire and shadow. The planet was dying around them. A shadow fell over them. An Arcturian warship descended from the clouds, its energy cannons trained on their position. "Scatter!" Greg yelled, shoving Thea towards a crumbling rock formation. As they scrambled for cover, the Grolak lunged for the experimental weapon, his eyes gleaming with avarice. "It is mine now," he roared, shoving Lisha aside. Thea reacted instantly. Using her intimate knowledge of Arcturian technology, she fired a precise burst of energy at the weapon's control panel, disabling it with a shower of sparks. The Grolak roared in fury, but Thea ignored him. She turned to the freed species, her face etched with shame and a desperate plea for understanding. "My family. They helped build this. I didn't know the full extent of their involvement. But I swear I will do everything in my power to stop it. We can't just huddle here and wait to die, Greg." Thea's voice cracked, desperation lacing her words. "That weapon. If we use the remaining energy to try and disable it, we might still have a chance." Greg shook his head, his face grim. "That's suicide, Thea. That energy shield is all that's keeping us alive. We use it offensively, we're sitting ducks for whatever's left of that Arcturian fleet." His hand tightened around his pulse rifle. "We defend ourselves, we buy time, maybe someone will hear our signal." Thea's bioluminescent skin flickered with anger. "Time for what, Greg? To watch this planet tear itself apart. My father helped build that weapon. I can't just stand by and let it happen. And I can't let us die for a lost cause," Greg countered, his voice hardening. "I've seen enough people die for causes, Thea. I'm not adding you to the list." The rift between them widened, a chasm carved by differing priorities and desperate circumstances. Meanwhile, in the shadows, the leader of the freed species, Jax, watched them argue. His eyes, usually filled with a weary resignation, now gleamed with a newfound ambition. He slipped away, his hand hovering over a hidden communicator. "Arcturian warship, this is Jax of the Krill. I have information, and a proposition." He offered Greg and Thea in exchange for safe passage and control of the planet's remaining resources. The seed of betrayal had been sown. Greg, his senses honed by years of combat, felt a prickle of unease. He watched Jax disappear, his gut screaming a warning. He began to subtly adjust the perimeter defenses, setting up tripwires with salvaged energy cells, positioning makeshift explosives fashioned from the research facility's discarded components. He trusted his instincts that had kept him alive when everyone else had died. The facility shuddered as the Arcturian warship, heeding Jax's call, launched a boarding party. Leading them was Commander Vark, a hulking figure encased in black armor, his face a mask of cold, calculated cruelty. "Bring me the human and the Arcturian traitor," he growled into his comm, "alive if possible." But their cooperation is not required. As the Arcturian boarding party neared, chaos erupted amongst the freed species. Some, loyal to Thea and Greg, prepared to defend them. Others, swayed by Jax's promises of power and safety, turned on their former allies. A violent skirmish broke out, energy weapons fire lighting up the dimly lit corridors, the air thick with the screams of the dying. Amidst the carnage, Thea stumbled upon a hidden section of the research facility. Her fingers flew across a control panel, and a holographic schematic appeared, revealing a prototype escape pod designed to withstand the planet's deteriorating conditions. A flicker of hope ignited within her, but the hope was quickly extinguished as she accessed the facility's data logs. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, revealing the truth. The planet's destruction was not a byproduct of the weaponization process, it was the intended result. And her father had been the lead scientist on the project. The weight of her family's legacy crashed down on her, crushing her spirit. Despite the crushing weight of her discovery, Thea knew what she had to do. "Greg, I found an escape pod," she yelled, her voice barely audible above the fighting. "It can withstand the planet's destruction, but we have to get a message out." They would use the pod's communication array to transmit a warning to the Galactic Council to expose the Arcturians' crimes. Humanity would not stand idly by. The Arcturian boarding party breached their defenses, their energy weapons tearing through the makeshift barricades. "Go, Thea," Greg roared, firing a volley of pulse rifle rounds. "Get to the pod. I'll hold them off." He stood his ground, a one-man army against the Arcturian onslaught, buying time for Thea and the others to escape. Thea, leading a small group of loyal freed species, raced towards the escape pod. The hatch hissed open, and they scrambled inside. The pod launched, rocketing through the collapsing facility, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from the Arcturian warship's energy cannons. From the viewport, Thea watched in horror as the full extent of the planet's destruction unfolded. The core destabilized, unleashing a cataclysmic energy surge that ripped through the atmosphere, tearing the planet apart. The energy surge slammed into the Arcturian warship, disabling its engines and weapons systems. Greg, trapped inside, felt the ship plummeting towards the dying planet. His fate seemed sealed, but Thea refused to accept it. "Override pre-programmed course," she shouted, her voice filled with desperate drive. "We're going back." She would attempt a rescue mission, defying the odds, determined to save Greg and redeem her family's legacy. Jax, witnessing the planet's destruction and the futility of his ambition, felt a pang of remorse. I was wrong," he stammered, his voice choked with regret. "I can help you. I know the Arcturian ship's layout." As the escape pod descended back towards the planet, a new light appeared in the sky. A ship, sleek and powerful, emerged from hyperspace, its hull emblazoned with the symbol of Earth. Reinforcements had arrived, answering their desperate call for help. The escape pod shuddered violently, alarms blaring red across Thea's face. Outside, a chaotic ballet of destruction unfolded. Flaming wreckage, twisted metal from what was once a planet, tumbled through space, punctuated by unpredictable bursts of energy. Thea wrestled with the controls, her hands slick with sweat. Each jolt threatened to rip the fragile craft apart. She stabbed at the comm panel, frustration mounting. The display flickered erratically, damaged severely. The best she could manage was bursts of static. Contacting Greg or the Earth fleet felt impossibly distant. Meanwhile, strapped to a cold metal table, Greg tasted blood. The Arcturian commander, a towering figure with eyes like chips of obsidian, loomed over him. The weapon, human, tell me its capabilities. Earth's defenses, I require. Data, Greg spat. The commander's fist slammed into his jaw. Pain exploded behind his eyes, but he focused on his training. Breathe, control, resist. He would give them nothing. The commander's voice, a guttural rasp, filled the small room. You misunderstand. Time is finite. Your species irrelevant. He gestured, and a low hum filled the air. Greg felt a searing pain lance through his mind, images flashing before his eyes. Maya, laughing, his fallen comrades, the faces of the dead. He clenched his teeth, fighting to maintain his grip on reality. Light years away, the Earth fleet dropped out of FTL. Admiral Lewis stared at the tactical display, her face grim. The planet, it was gone. Reduced to a debris field, a testament to Arcturian ruthlessness. Report, she commanded, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Sensors are picking up. Widespread destruction, Admiral, a young officer reported, his voice trembling. No survivors detected on the surface. Lewis closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her gaze hardening. Scan for anything, life signs. Escape pods and the Arcturian warship. Thea, her fingers flying across the damaged console, managed to coax a flicker of power from the communications array. A burst of static, then a fragmented signal, a desperate plea for help, shot out into the void. The signal was weak, barely a whisper, but it was there. On the bridge of the Arcturian warship, a technician's eyes widened. Commander. We have detected a distress signal, originating from an escape pod near the debris field. The commander's face remained impassive. Confirm origin. Confirmed. Arcturian pod occupied. Irrelevant. It poses a risk. Order a squadron of fighters to intercept and destroy it. But before the Arcturian fighters could reach their target, a lone fighter, salvaged and repainted, screamed out of the debris field. Piloting it was the freed species leader, his face a mask of iron will. He knew the odds were impossible, but he would buy Thea time. He had to. For freedom. He roared over the comms, unleashing a volley of plasma fire at the Arcturian squadron. The Arcturian fighters, caught off guard, scattered. The freed species fighter danced between them, a whirlwind of defiance, but it was outgunned, outmatched. Back on the warship, Greg was being dragged down a sterile corridor towards a holding cell. His head throbbed, his body ached, but his mind remained sharp. He noticed it then, a flicker, a surge, a subtle instability in the energy conduits running along the ceiling. The energy regulation system. It was flawed, vulnerable, easily exploited. As the guards shoved him into the cell, Greg subtly kicked a panel loose, exposing a tangle of wires. He waited for the guards to leave, then with a surge of adrenaline he short-circuited the regulators, creating a small explosion that rocked the corridor. Alarms blared. The guards stumbled. Greg seized the opportunity, slamming one against the wall and disarming the other. He was free. All ships, this is Admiral Lewis, her voice crackled over the comms. Execute diversionary attack on the Arcturian warship. Draw their fire. Protect any potential survivors. The Earth fleet surged forward, unleashing a barrage of missiles and energy weapons at the warship. The Arcturian vessel, massive and heavily armed, returned fire, the battle a maelstrom of destruction. Inside the escape pod, Thea worked frantically, soldering wires and rerouting power. With the help of the remaining freed species, she jury-rigged a makeshift shield, hoping it would be enough to deflect at least some of the incoming fire. Greg, meanwhile, navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the warship, evading patrols and searching for the energy regulation chamber. He knew what he had to do: overload the system. It was a desperate gamble, one that could destroy the warship, but it was the only chance he saw. The battle raged on. The Earth fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a ferocity born of grief and rage. Ships exploded, their crews sacrificing themselves to buy time for Thea and Greg. Finally, Greg reached the energy regulation chamber. The air crackled with raw power. He saw the damaged regulators, the exposed wires, the potential for catastrophic failure. He began to work, his hands moving with practiced speed, bypassing safety protocols and rerouting energy flow. The freed species leader's fighter, riddled with holes and trailing smoke, finally succumbed to the Arcturian onslaught. He ejected just moments before it exploded, his escape pod a tiny speck against the backdrop of the burning planet. Thea, detecting the signal, altered course, heading towards the crippled escape pod. On the bridge of the warship, the Arcturian commander finally understood. The human. He's sabotaging the energy regulators. Evacuate the ship. Prepare for self-destruct. We cannot allow our technology to fall into their hands. Admiral Lewis received a garbled message from Greg. Energy regulators, unstable, overload. Then, static. The transmission cut out. She didn't know what Greg was planning, but she knew it was dangerous. Admiral, the escape pod, it's changing course, an officer reported. It's heading towards the Arcturian warship. Inside the escape pod, Thea ignored the freed species leader's protests. His voice, weak and raspy, filled the small cabin. It's suicide. You can't go back there. He's already dead. Thea's face was set with drive. I have to try. Thea's escape pod bucked violently, alarms blaring as a cascade of explosions hammered the Arcturian warship. Jagged shards of metal screeched against the pod's hull. Every impact shuddered through her teeth. Her console flickered, displaying Greg's life sign, a weak pulse originating from a heavily damaged section near the engine core. It pulsed faintly. A self-destruct timer, originating from the bridge, ticked down implacably 17 minutes. The two signals were on a collision course. On the bridge of the Zeus, Admiral Lewis watched the tactical display. Focus all fire on the warship's weapons emplacements, she barked, her voice tight. Disable those cannons before they can initiate a self-destruct sequence. Deep within the bowels of the dying warship, Greg coughed, blood splattering against his cracked visor. He'd managed to sabotage the primary self-destruct mechanism, a complex network of plasma conduits he'd rerouted to overload. But now, a secondary failsafe had engaged, blinking red on a nearby console. A simpler, more direct system. The display flashed. Command authorization required. The failsafe demanded a unique command code known only to the Arcturian commander. Another hurdle. On a rapidly departing shuttle, Commander Arcturian monitored the chaos unfolding on the warship. His mandibles clicked in grim satisfaction. They may have crippled my ship, he hissed, his voice a low rasp, but they will not escape its final embrace. His fingers danced across the shuttle's console, preparing to activate the failsafe remotely. Ignoring the frantic pleas of the freed species leader echoing in her comms, Thea wrestled the escape pod toward a gaping hole blasted into the warship side, a docking bay ripped open by human fire. I have to try, she transmitted, her voice strained. He's still alive. Greg, every breath a searing agony, crawled through a mangled corridor, flames licking at his armor. Collapsing bulkheads threatened to crush him. He had to reach the docking bay, he had to reach Thea. Admiral, a voice crackled over Lewis's comms, the Arcturian warship isn't responding to our attacks as expected. Energy signatures are fluctuating wildly. Lewis frowned, her eyes narrowed. They're playing possum, prepare for a trap or a very big bang. Inside the warship, Thea navigated a scene of unimaginable carnage. Twisted metal groaned, sparks showered from severed conduits, and the air hung thick with the stench of burning flesh and ionized coolant. The few surviving Arcturian crew members stumbled through the wreckage, desperate to reach the remaining escape pods. She moved with deadly efficiency, disabling them with precise bursts from her pulse pistol set to stun, non-lethal takedowns. They were still sentient beings, even if they were trying to escape a doomed ship. Greg stumbled upon a flickering comm panel, a garbled transmission. Failsafe. Code sequence. Initiating. It was Arcturian. He was activating the failsafe. He smacked his fist against the panel, attempting to jam the signal, but Arcturian anticipated this. The transmission rerouted, bypassing Greg's interference, locking onto a secure channel. On the shuttle, Arcturian's fingers hovered over the final key. He inhaled sharply, then input the code. Authorization accepted. Failsafe sequence initiated. T-5 minutes. Thea found Greg slumped against a wall, his armor scorched and buckled, his face pale with pain. He was alive barely. Greg. She heaved him to his feet, looping his arm around her shoulder. We have to go. On the Zeus, alarms blared. Admiral energy readings spiking on the Arcturian warship. It's going critical. Lewis's face hardened. All ships disengage, move to a safe distance. That vessel is about to become a supernova. Thea strained, dragging Greg towards the gaping maw of the docking bay. Internal bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off sections of the ship. They had to hurry. The code, Greg gasped, his voice a ragged whisper. I overheard. Arcturian, the first 3 digits are 729. He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. And a failsafe, override, exists. Thea activated her comms, her voice tight with desperation. Zeus, this is Thea. I have partial override code for the self-destruct. Transmitting now. The transmission crackled, then died as a blinding light erupted from the warship. A shockwave slammed into Thea, throwing her against a bulkhead. The docking bay dissolved in a searing inferno. Silence, and then nothing, the ringing. It was a high-pitched whine that bored into Thea's skull, a counterpoint to the low rumble that vibrated through what remained of the deck. Dust and twisted metal rained down, obscuring everything in a gritty haze. Coughing, Thea blinked, her vision slowly resolving the scene. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, forming a makeshift shield that had likely saved her life. Greg. Panic flared. She scrambled to her knees, pushing against the weight of the debris. Greg. Silence, save for the groaning of the dying warship. She heaved a chunk of plasteel aside, her augmented strength straining against the weight. Another piece, smaller this time, revealed a glimpse of orange fabric. His uniform. He was alive. Or at least he was still there. He was pinned. A thick girder had collapsed across his legs, the weight immense. The escape pod, a mere meter away, was a mangled ruin, its emergency beacon flickering uselessly. Hope, so fleetingly present, died. Thea strained, her muscles screaming in protest. The girder wouldn't budge. She needed leverage. Desperation clawed at her. Greg's face was pale, his eyes closed. Greg, wake up. She slapped his cheek, not gently. His eyelids fluttered. He groaned, a low, guttural sound. Thea. I'm here, you're pinned, I need to get this off you. She braced herself, legs trembling, and tried again. Nothing, but then a flicker of movement. She looked down. His hand, trembling, was reaching for a release mechanism on his belt, a combat knife. Cut the straps of my gear, he rasped. Lighter, wait. Working together, she managed to free him from the bulk of his equipment. It made a difference. With a final, agonizing heave, she shifted the girder just enough to drag him free. His leg. Thea averted her gaze, but the image seared itself onto her mind. The bone was broken, jutting out at an unnatural angle. Blood pulsed from the wound, soaking his uniform. She ripped strips from her own tunic, applying pressure to the wound. Arcturian first aid was different, but basic principles were universal. Stop the bleeding. The warship groaned again, louder this time. Internal gravity flickered, throwing them both against the wall. The ship was dying, tearing itself apart. Greg coughed, spitting blood. Override, failsafe. Thea's mind raced. The failsafe, the mechanism to prevent a catastrophic chain reaction. She had almost forgotten in the chaos. The failsafe is still an option, she asked, pressing harder on the makeshift bandage. Only way, he gasped. Explosion will trigger, planet-wide, resonance cascade. Resonance cascade, the Arcturians had feared it for centuries. A self-sustaining energy release that would shatter the planet's core. We need to transmit the override code, Thea said, her voice tight, to Admiral Lewis. She scrambled towards the escape pod's comm system. Useless. The console was a charred mess of melted circuits. Greg, his face contorted in pain, was crawling towards something. What? There, he groaned, pointing to a mangled section of the wall. An Arcturian communication panel ripped from its housing, wires sparking. It's Arcturian, Thea said, doubt creeping into her voice. Doesn't matter, Greg muttered, his fingers already probing the damaged circuits. Just need connection. He worked with a focused intensity that belied his injuries, splicing wires together with his knife, ignoring the jolts of electricity that coursed through his body. Finally, a faint hum, a flicker of light on the panel. Got it, he said, his voice strained. But signal's weak. Too weak. Thea scanned the wreckage, her mind racing. The relay station. Section 4, it's still intact. Mostly we could boost the signal from there. Greg looked at his leg, then back at Thea. You go, I'll cover you. No, Thea said firmly. I need you, I know the system, I know the access codes. You can tell me, Greg countered, his voice weakening. No time, she snapped. Besides, she added, a hint of something akin to affection in her voice, who else is going to carry me? He managed a weak smile. Fair enough. Thea helped him to his feet, looping his arm around her shoulder. He leaned heavily on her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Together they began to move, navigating the collapsing warship. Fires raged around them, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the twisted metal. The groaning of the ship grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, a tremor shook the vessel. Thea lost her footing and they both stumbled. Another missile strike, Greg gasped. They're not taking any chances. On the bridge of the Hope, Admiral Lewis stared at the sensor readings, her face grim. They're targeting the core, she said, her voice tight. They want to make sure there's nothing left. Ma'am, we have multiple energy signatures approaching the warship, a sensor officer reported. Arcturian missiles. Lewis's eyes narrowed. They're trying to finish the job. They know about the failsafe. Recommend we pull back, Admiral, her first officer said. The risk is too great. Lewis hesitated. The lives of her crew versus the potential destruction of an entire planet. It was an impossible choice. Order Squadron 3 to intercept, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They are to protect the warship from further damage, even at the cost of their own ships. Thea and Greg reached the relay station. The door was buckled and jammed, but Thea managed to force it open with a surge of her augmented strength. Inside, the station was a mess of sparking wires and shattered consoles. A security drone, its casing scorched and dented, spun erratically in the center of the room, its weapon arm twitching. Stand back, Thea warned, raising her hand. The drone whirred, its optical sensors focusing on them. Intruders detected, lethal force authorized. Thea quickly rerouted power from a damaged console to the drone's control matrix. Override, security protocols, non-lethal, compliance. The drone shuddered, its weapon arm lowering. Security protocols, overridden, awaiting instructions. Help us clear the path, Thea ordered, non-lethally. The drone, now an unlikely ally, began to systematically clear the debris from the room, its movements surprisingly precise. As Thea worked to repair the relay station, Greg leaned against a console, catching his breath. He noticed something on the drone's scanner. Thea, he said, pointing to the screen. The drone. It's detecting other life signs on the ship. Thea glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. Survivors, but doesn't matter now. She turns back to the task at hand, almost there. With a final surge of power, the relay station flickered to life. Thea breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, we're ready to transmit, but what? Greg asked, his voice strained. We need Arcturian authorization to access the relay network. Damn it, another dead end. Greg closed his eyes, thinking. He remembered something he had overheard earlier. The drone, he said, his eyes snapping open. When it scanned us, it gave an identification code. Could that work? Thea looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. It's worth a try. She accessed the relay station's control panel, her fingers flying across the keys. Enter authorization code. Greg recited the code he had overheard, his voice hoarse. Delta Sierra 79er Kilo. Thea entered the code, the system word processing. Access. Granted, a synthesized voice announced. Relief washed over them. They had done it. Just as Thea began the override sequence, another tremor ripped through the warship. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The core. It had been hit. The warship began to fully break apart. The warship bucked violently, a metal leviathan convulsing in its death throes. Groaning under unimaginable stress, bulkheads twisted and rivets popped like firecrackers. Thea slammed against the relay console, her breath catching in her throat. Override sequence initiated, she gasped, her Arcturian bioluminescence flickering erratically, but corrupted data packet, manual fix required. Sparks showered down as Greg ripped a security drone from its charging station. I'll keep the light show off your back. Just fix it. He unleashed a stream of plasma fire, vaporizing sparking electrical conduits before they could explode in their faces, the air thick with the acrid smell of ozone and burning metal. Thea's fingers danced across the holographic interface, her eyes scanning lines of code. Found it. Memory matrix. Packet 734. Initiating bypass. This is risky, could fry the whole system. Outside, Admiral Lewis's squadron engaged the incoming Arcturian missiles. A brilliant flash illuminated the interior as one missile was vaporized by point defense lasers, but two more streaked past, burning contrails etched against the void. Suddenly, the relay station lurched as the gravity generators sputtered and died. Thea was thrown from her feet, slamming into the console. The bypass progress bar vanished. Damn it, she cried, pushing herself up. Reset. Greg hauled her back to her feet, his face grim. Get back on it, Thea. You saw what they did. Planetary devastation. We don't have time for this to fail. His voice, rough with urgency, cut through the cacophony. Thea nodded, her lips pursed with perseverance. Resetting bypass. Now. The progress bar crawled agonizingly slowly across the screen, each percentage point feeling like an eternity. Alarms blared, a relentless symphony of impending doom. A deafening explosion rocked the warship. A missile had struck, detonating close by. The relay station's lights flickered violently, threatening to plunge them into darkness. Thea gritted her teeth, her fingers flying across the console as sparks erupted around her. 98%, 99. She breathed, her voice strained. Complete. The override code surged through the system, a digital lifeline thrown into the abyss. Override transmitted. It's done, Greg, it's done. Lewis received the override, a voice crackled over Greg's comm. Initiating failsafe protocols. With the override sent, their immediate mission was complete. Now, survival. Let's move. Greg yelled, grabbing Thea's arm. We need to find a way out of this tin can before it becomes our coffin. They navigated through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling debris and pools of leaking coolant. Rounding a corner, they found a group of survivors huddled behind a reinforced bulkhead. Arcturian engineers, their faces streaked with grime and fear, huddled alongside human prisoners of war, their eyes wide with terror. Help us! One of the Arcturian engineers pleaded, his voice trembling. We were forced to work on the core systems. They threatened to kill our families if we refused. Greg hesitated, his hand resting on his sidearm. He wanted to help, but every second counted. Lingering here put the entire planet at risk. Greg, wait, Thea said, her voice urgent. They might know something about the failsafe systems, something that could help stabilize the core further. Greg's eyes narrowed. She was right. Intel was more valuable than blind vengeance. All right, he said, his voice firm. We help them. Thea assessed the structural integrity of this location. Now, Thea activated her wrist-mounted scanner, its blue light sweeping across the bulkhead. Structurally sound for now, she reported. But I'm detecting a hidden compartment, encrypted data logs. She worked quickly, bypassing the security protocols. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a series of encrypted files. This is the warship's true mission, Thea said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. They were supposed to deploy a bioweapon on a pre-selected planet. Bioweapon? Greg asked, his voice dangerous. Designed to terraform planets for Arcturian colonization, Thea replied, her fingers flying across the console, but lethal to most other species. Her bioluminescence faded, her face paling. The data logs. They show the Arcturian commander rerouted the warship before the explosion. The override neutralized the primary goal, but the mission. The new target is Earth. And the bioweapon is armed. Thea's voice, strained, cut through the tension. It's a bioweapon, programmed to target major population centers. Atmospheric dispersal upon entry. The airlock hissed open, revealing a cramped chamber filled with Arcturian engineers, their multi-jointed limbs flailing as they worked frantically amidst sparking wires and flickering holographic displays. One of the engineers, his voice a raspy static, piped up. There is a failsafe, a specific frequency. It will disarm the deployment system. Thea's hope was fleeting. But we lack the equipment, the expertise. This warship is a ruin. Greg's teeth gritted. Earth Command, this is Jones. We have a situation. We need a remote frequency generator capable of emitting a precise counter frequency. And guidance. We need to know everything about Earth's atmosphere, dispersal patterns. Everything. The response was immediate. Copy that, Jones. Stand by. We are scrambling all resources. ETA. Uncertain. The voice was tight with urgency. Thea and the engineers, bathed in the sickly green glow of emergency lights, were already tearing apart the warship's damaged communication array. Radiation warnings blared and the entire structure groaned under the strain. The communication array can be modified, Thea announced, her bioluminescent skin flickering with concentration. But the radiation, the instability. Greg contacted Admiral Lewis. Lewis, they're prepping the bioweapon. We need time. Can you intercept? We're moving to intercept, Jones, Lewis's voice crackled back. But we're outgunned. We can only buy you minutes. Minutes that felt like an eternity. Thea, with Earth Command feeding her data, worked with feverish intensity, rerouting power conduits and calibrating the makeshift transmitter. Sparks showered around them and the air crackled with ozone. Almost. Thea muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. Earth Command, give me the sequence. Now. The counter frequency, a series of complex tones, filled the wreckage. The bioweapon, suspended in its launch bay, shuddered. Then, with a flash of blue light, it imploded, the energy contained in a localized burst that left the ship trembling but intact. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, a chorus of cheers erupted from the Earth Command frequency. News of Earth's averted destruction spread like wildfire, galvanizing support for an investigation into Arcturian exploitation. The Galactic Council, once a bastion of complacency, was now a storm of accusations and denials. Greg, standing beside Thea before the council, presented the evidence. Holographic recordings of the child's death, schematics of the harvesting zones, intercepted communications revealing the cover-up. Thea, her voice clear and unwavering, testified to the negligence and corruption she had uncovered. The turning point came when representatives from the exploited species rose to speak, their voices filled with pain, but also with newfound hope. Inspired by humanity's resilience and Thea's courage, they formed a new alliance, demanding reform and accountability. The Galactic Council buckled. The old guard was ousted, and the council was restructured, granting greater representation to the exploited species and establishing independent oversight of resource management. On Arcturus, a peaceful revolution swept through the government. Reformers, led by scientists and engineers who had witnessed the horrors of the old system, implemented sustainable practices and prioritized interspecies cooperation. Greg and Thea stood together on the bridge of a newly commissioned starship, watching a holographic projection of the reformed Galactic Council in session. "It's a start," Greg said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Thea nodded, but there's still so much work to do. Greg turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth. "I was thinking, Earth could use a new base, a place for interspecies cooperation, a symbol of what we've learned." Thea's bioluminescent skin glowed brighter, a place built on empathy and shared responsibility. They stood in comfortable silence, two figures silhouetted against the dawn of a new era, an era built on the ashes of tragedy and the promise of a better future. The journey had been brutal, but the destination, a galaxy where understanding and cooperation triumphed over exploitation and greed, was finally within reach.